My name is Lucas. I haven't slept in 7 days, not since the night I saw the woman in the red sari standing at the end of my hallway, humming a lullaby that didn't belong to this world. It started with a knock. Not loud, not frantic, just a soft, almost polite knock on my apartment door. I wouldn't have even noticed it if I hadn't been sitting on the couch staring blankly at the television. The volume was low, the news anchor's voice drifting in and out, just enough to keep me company in the silence. I lived alone in a modest one-bedroom flat on the 3rd floor of an old building near the edge of the city, the kind of place where the paint peeled from the corners and the pipes always groaned when the temperature dropped. I hadn't had a visitor in months. I didn't expect anyone. When the knock came again, I paused, waiting to hear footsteps or another sound, but there was nothing, just the steady hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I stood slowly, padded over to the door, and looked through the peephole-empty hallway, dimly lit, silent. I opened the door anyway, the hinges creaking like they hadn't been used in years. No one, not even a trace of footsteps on the dusty floor tiles outside. I stuck my head out, glanced both directions. Still nothing, but then I looked down. On the floor, stretched tightly across the doorway, was a single red thread. It wasn't attached to anything I could see, just laying there, perfectly straight, as if someone had deliberately placed it that way. I bent down and reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the thread, it snapped. Not with tension, not like it had been pulled, more like it disintegrated at my touch. Thin fibers floated into the air, catching the light for just a second before vanishing. I shook my head and stepped back inside. I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe it had blown in from the stairwell. Maybe it had been there all day and I just hadn't noticed. Still, I locked the door and slid the chain across, suddenly more aware of how quiet everything felt. The air inside my apartment was still, thick, like a held breath. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. But around 3 in the morning I heard it again, the knocking. Not at my door this time, but softer, more distant. I couldn't tell if it was coming from the floor above or below. Maybe the plumbing again, maybe a neighbor. I rolled over and closed my eyes. But it came again, closer this time. 3 soft knocks, tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed, my heart thudding hard in my chest. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything. But there was only silence. I got up and walked to the door, looked through the peephole, nothing. But as I turned to go back to bed, something caught my eye through the small hallway window. Someone was standing at the far end of the corridor beneath the flickering ceiling light. A woman. She was facing away from me, completely still. Long black hair that reached past her waist. A faded red sari that swayed slightly, even though the hallway air was still. I stared at her, waiting for her to move, to turn around, to walk away. She didn't. She just stood there, back to me, motionless. A strange sense of pressure filled my ears, like the world around me was holding its breath. Then the light above her flickered and went out. Total darkness. When it flicked back on a second later, she was gone. Just empty space. I blinked hard and rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I had imagined it. Lack of sleep, stress, loneliness. I shut the door, locked it again, and leaned my back against it. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat at the edge of my bed until morning, watching the hallway through the window, waiting for the woman to return. She never did. But in the quiet moments, just before sunrise, I could have sworn I heard something faint, far off, like humming. A slow, haunting melody, as though someone was singing to themselves in another room. But there was no one else in my apartment. The next few days were quiet, but not in a comforting way. More like the calm that settles before something breaks. I went about my routine as best I could, waking up late, skipping breakfast, scrolling endlessly through my phone just to feel connected to something. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It wasn't just paranoia. It was something more primal. The hair on the back of my neck would rise for no reason. Shadows in the corners of my apartment seemed to stretch longer than they should. The silence had a weight to it, like the air was pressing down on me. It started with the humming, faint at first, so faint I thought I was imagining it. A soft, wordless tune that seemed to drift in from nowhere in particular. I checked every source of noise, turned off the TV, unplugged the fridge, even pressed my ear to the walls to see if it was coming from the neighboring apartment. Nothing. And yet, the melody continued, always the same notes, over and over. Gentle, almost soothing, but the more I heard it, the more it unnerved me. The worst part was that it followed me. I went down to the small shop on the corner to grab groceries, hoping that getting outside would help clear my head. As I walked through the aisles, I could still hear the tune, muffled under the noise of the shopkeeper's radio. It wasn't loud, but it was there. I left in a hurry without buying anything. That night, I sat on the floor of my living room with all the lights on. I didn't feel like sleeping. My bed had started to feel wrong, like someone else had been lying there before me. Around midnight I heard the knock again. This time it was slower. 3 deliberate taps. I stood up and walked to the door, but I didn't look through the peephole. I just stood there, listening. The humming had grown louder, like it was coming from directly outside. I backed away and locked myself in the bathroom. I turned on the shower and sat on the cold tile floor, trying to drown out the sound with the noise of the water. For a while it worked. I stayed there for over an hour until the water ran cold. When I came out, the apartment was silent again, but something was different. On my bed, carefully placed in the center of the mattress, was another red thread. This one was tied into a small, perfect loop like a bracelet or maybe a noose. I didn't touch it. I didn't even go near it. I just stared at it for a long time, trying to understand what it meant. Who could have put it there? The door was locked, every window shut tight. But next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe I had tied the thread myself. But the thought didn't sit right. There was no part of me that could explain the woman I had seen in the hallway, or the knocking, or the way the thread looked like it had been placed with care. Later that day I saw her again. I was riding the metro, sitting near the window, trying not to think about anything at all. As the train pulled into a crowded station, I caught a glimpse of her through the opposite window. She was standing on the platform, completely still, while everyone else moved past her. Red Sari, black hair. This time, she was facing me. Her face was partially covered by her hair, but I could see enough to feel something sink in my chest. Her expression wasn't angry, it wasn't even sad. It was empty, a blank, emotionless stare, like she wasn't looking at me but through me. The doors shut, and the train pulled away, but I couldn't stop staring at the spot where she had been. That night, I placed the red thread in a drawer and locked it. I didn't know what else to do. I wanted to believe it was over, that I was just imagining things. But as I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, the humming returned. Closer this time, louder, and mixed into the melody was something else, something just beneath the surface, a whisper, my name. I stopped trying to live normally. Work became an afterthought. I called in sick 3 days in a row, each time telling myself I'd pull it together tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like I was being followed, watched, studied, not just by her but by something older, deeper, something that existed just out of view. Sleep became rare. I'd close my eyes for an hour or two, but my dreams weren't dreams anymore. They were long, endless corridors where I wandered alone, hearing soft footsteps behind me that never caught up. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart racing with the image of a face burned into the back of my eyelids. Only it wasn't a full face. It was fragments, a pale cheek stained with blood, a cracked, dry smile, eyes that didn't match, one milky white, the other pitch black. I couldn't stop hearing the humming. It came from nowhere, but filled every corner of my apartment. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from the walls, like someone was behind them slowly dragging their fingers across the concrete. At other times it felt like it was inside my head, vibrating through my skull. The red thread started appearing more frequently, not just on my bed. I found one tied around the handle of the bathroom faucet, another looped neatly on top of the microwave. Each one was small, delicate, placed like a warning or an invitation. One morning, I woke to find a single thread wrapped around my wrist. It wasn't tight, but it had left a faint red mark beneath it, like it had been there for hours. I pulled it off and threw it away, but the mark stayed. That was the same day I tried to stay at a friend's place. I didn't tell him the real reason. I just said my apartment had plumbing issues and I needed a place to crash. He didn't ask many questions. I thought maybe putting distance between myself and the apartment would help. I was wrong. The first night there, everything seemed fine, normal to normal. But at exactly 3:33 a.m. I heard it again, the knocking, 3 soft taps on the door. I froze in bed, holding my breath, hoping my friend had heard it too. But there was no reaction from the other room. I got up and approached the door. Slowly, each step felt heavier than the last. I looked through the peephole, nothing, just an empty hallway, but I could hear something very faint like a distant song, the same humming. I went back to bed, forcing myself to ignore it, but I didn't sleep. The air in the room had shifted. It felt heavier, thicker, like something invisible was leaning down on me. The next morning I left before sunrise, not bothering to explain why. Back in my own apartment, the smell hit me the moment I stepped inside. Damp, metallic, like rust or dried blood. I checked every room, every surface, but couldn't find a source. Nothing was physically wrong, but the smell lingered. In the bathroom mirror, I noticed something else. As I wiped the fog from the glass, I saw a faint message written across the surface. Letters smudged and uneven, as if drawn by a shaking hand. MOHINI. I stared at it for a long time. The name felt like an echo in my mind, not unfamiliar, but buried. I tried to think if I had ever known anyone by that name. A classmate, a neighbor, a character from a story, but nothing came. Just a hollow, gnawing sense of recognition. I left the mirror fogged and backed out of the room. My breathing had quickened without me realizing. I went to the kitchen to splash cold water on my face, and that's when I saw a tin of the red thread, this time floating in my glass of water. Just one. Perfectly straight. I dumped the water down the sink and stared into the drain, unsure if I was losing my mind or being hunted by something I couldn't name. That night, as I sat on the floor of my darkened living room, I felt something brush the back of my neck. It was so gentle, so faint, I almost thought I imagined it, but I didn't, because when I turned around, the lights flickered, and someone was standing just beyond the glow. I didn't move. I couldn't. The figure stood just outside the reach of the light, barely visible, but I knew it was her. Even in the shadows, that red sari was unmistakable. Her hair hung like a curtain, obscuring her face. She didn't move, didn't sway, didn't breathe. Just stood there, watching me from the edge of the room. I blinked, and in that instant, the lights flickered again and she was gone. The silence afterward was worse than her presence. I sat frozen, knees pulled to my chest, every part of me alert and trembling. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. I stopped trying. Sleep was a doorway, and I no longer trusted what waited behind it. I started researching. I didn't know what I was even looking for, just grasping at any connection that might make sense. I typed the name Mohini into search engines, hoping it would just be a common name, something harmless. But what I found was different old articles, forums buried deep in the web, scraps of folklore passed down like warnings. A spirit, they said. A woman betrayed in love, who died violently and returned with vengeance. A name whispered in fear. According to one version, Mohini marked her chosen with red thread, a thread that symbolized a bond, one that could not be broken. Some stories claimed it was tied around doorways, others around limbs. In rare cases, it was placed inside the body as if it were being woven through the victim, piece by piece. Once marked, escape was impossible. The end was only a matter of time. One post described her as a parasite that attached itself to people on the verge of emotional collapse. Another claimed she only appeared to those who had seen their own death. I didn't know what to believe, but I knew the red thread kept returning. The next morning I woke up on the couch, the TV still on. Static hissed softly from the speakers. When I stood up, something slipped off my shoulder and floated to the ground. A red thread tied to my shirt, not just laid there knotted. I spent the rest of the day in silence. No sounds, no humming, no knocking. For a brief moment, I believed maybe the storm had passed. I even stepped outside, walked aimlessly through the streets, avoiding mirrors and reflective surfaces. But that night, as I prepared to sleep, I found something I couldn't explain. Inside my bedroom closet, buried beneath a pile of old clothes I hadn't touched in years, was a photograph. Yellowed with age, bent at the corners. I didn't recognize it at first, but the more I stared, the colder I felt. It was a picture of this building, my building, but from decades ago. The exterior was cracked and weathered, the windows shattered. In front of it stood a woman in a red sari, looking directly at the camera. Her face was blurry, as if the film had decayed. But behind her, in the top-floor window, was a figure. It was me. Same face, the same clothes I was wearing in that moment. I dropped the photo, my hands trembling. It made no sense. That picture was old, really old, long before I was born. But the person in the window was unmistakably me, looking out as if I had been there all along. I locked every door, covered every mirror, turned on every light. I sat with the photo in my lap, staring at it, trying to find some logical explanation, a coincidence, a mistake, anything. But logic had long since left this place. Hours passed in silence, until the power suddenly cut out. Everything went black. I stumbled through the darkness, reaching for my phone, but it was dead. I lit a candle, the tiny flame casting long shadows along the walls. And then I heard it, a woman's voice, soft, singing the same lullaby I had heard for nights, only now it had words. I couldn't understand them, but they were cold and mournful, like a warning sung through clenched teeth. The candle flickered violently. In the dim light, I saw her again. She wasn't in the room. She was in the mirror across from me, one I thought I had covered. But the sheet had been pulled away and she was smiling. I dropped the candle. The flame vanished instantly, swallowed by the darkness that pressed in from all sides. For a moment I just stood there, frozen, staring at the mirror across the room. She was still there, even without the light outlined faintly in the silvered glass, as if the mirror itself had absorbed her. Her smile lingered long after her face began to fade, the curve of her mouth carved into my memory like a wound. When I finally managed to move, I threw a blanket over the mirror, my hands shaking violently, but the room didn't feel any different. Her presence hadn't left. It was like she was in the walls, in the floor, inside me. Every breath I took felt heavy, like I was inhaling smoke. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat on the couch, arms wrapped around my knees, staring at the doorway, waiting for the knocking, but it never came. What came instead was silence, and natural, dead silence. Not even the hum of the refrigerator or the occasional creak of the pipes. It was like the world outside had vanished. I turned on my phone. No signal. The date and time were gone, just blank space on the screen. I didn't know what day it was anymore. I didn't know how long I'd been inside. The red thread was back, wrapped around both my wrists this time, so tight the skin beneath was turning purple. I tried to cut them off with scissors, but they slid right through, as if the threads weren't even there, but they were. I could feel the pressure, the burn, the way they pulsed like veins. Then came the dreams again. Only this time they didn't feel like dreams. I wasn't floating through corridors or chasing shadows. I was standing in my own apartment, in complete darkness, unable to move. I could feel her breath on the back of my neck, cold, wet, and then she would whisper something in a language I didn't know. The more it happened, the less I remembered who I was. My reflection, when I dared to look, no longer matched what I felt inside. My face looked thinner, older, like time was moving differently in here. Sometimes I would blink and find the red thread stretched across the room like a web. Other times I would find more photographs, old ones of me standing in places I'd never been, always with her somewhere in the background, watching. Eventually I tried to leave. I grabbed my keys, opened the door, and stepped out into the hallway. But the hallway was gone. In its place was a long corridor, lined with rotting doors, each one marked with a symbol I didn't recognize. The light overhead flickered, casting long, shifting shadows. I walked for what felt like hours. Every door I opened led to another version of my apartment, each one older, more decayed, more wrong. Some had furniture covered in white sheets. Others had broken mirrors, shattered glass, blood on the walls. In one room I found myself, or someone who looked like me, lying still on the floor, red thread tangled around his limbs like vines. His eyes were open, his mouth stretched in a silent scream. I ran. I don't know how long I ran for. I lost track of time, of direction. Every turn led back to the same place, the same room, my apartment. But it was no longer mine. It had aged decades, maybe more. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, the windows were boarded up, and standing in the center was her Mohini. She didn't speak, she didn't move, but I understood. This place was hers now, or maybe it always had been. Maybe I had only been passing through a space she controlled, a puppet wandering in a stage built for my undoing. I woke up back on my couch. Sunlight spilled through the windows like nothing had happened. My phone buzzed, notifications, missed calls. It was Tuesday. I checked the mirror. My reflection looked normal. I checked my wrists, no thread. For a while I believed it was over. I went outside, took a walk, ate at a diner. The world felt real again. But that night, as I took off my shirt before bed, I noticed something new. A small stitch near my shoulder blade. Red thread, pulled tight through the skin. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And from the corner of the room, very faintly, I heard her humming.